They ignored him because of his uniform. They walked past him as if he were invisible. But what the billionaires and board members of the prestigious Crestview Academy didn't know was that the man emptying their trash cans held a secret that would shatter their elitist world. Keep watching to see how a janitor taught a room full of millionaires a lesson they would never forget. And before we begin, if you believe you should never judge a book by its cover, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the truth about human nature. The fluorescent lights of Crestview Academy hummed with a low-frequency buzz that only Elijah seemed to hear. At 6 p.m., the hallways of the city's most expensive private school were mostly empty, save for the rhythmic swish-clack of Elijah's mop bucket rolling over the marble floors. Elijah was 62 years old, a tall man with graying temples and hands calloused from years of manual labor. To the students, he was just Mr. Eli, the guy who unlocked the gym or cleaned up spilled sodas in the cafeteria. To the faculty, he was largely invisible, a piece of moving furniture in a navy blue jumpsuit. But Elijah had a ritual. Every evening, when cleaning the AP calculus classroom, he would pause. The blackboard was often covered in the frantic scrawls of Mr. Henderson, a brilliant but disorganized mathematician who struggled to convey concepts to teenagers. Tonight, the board was covered in a complex problem regarding differential equations intended to model fluid dynamics. Henderson had abandoned it halfway through, a jagged line of chalk striking through the equation in frustration. Elijah leaned his mop against the wall. He adjusted his glasses, picked up a piece of yellow chalk, and stared at the board. He didn't erase Henderson's work. Instead, he circled the error in the third line, a derivative mistake, and then, in neat, elegant script, finished the proof. He wrote a small note in the corner: "Scaffolding isn't just for construction. Break down the variable x before integrating." He wiped the chalk dust from his hands, picked up his mop, and vanished into the corridor just as the heavy oak doors of the administrative wing opened. Richard Sterling, a venture capitalist and the chairman of the school board, stormed out of the meeting room, rubbing his temples. He was worth $300 million, but he couldn't buy his way out of Crestview's current problem. Accreditation was at risk. The state's standardized testing scores for the school had plateaued, and student engagement in STEM was at an all-time low. The parents, senators, CEOs, and celebrities were threatening to pull their funding. "We need a new curriculum," Sterling muttered to Principal Vance, who was trotting to keep up. "The consultants from D.C. are useless. They talk about a synergy and paradigm shifts, but they don't know how to teach." "We're doing our best, Richard," Vance stammered. "We have the best teachers money can buy." "Then why are the kids failing to grasp practical application?" Sterling stopped abruptly. They were standing outside the calculus room. Through the glass pane, Sterling saw the blackboard. "Who is in there?" "Nobody," Vance said. "Just the cleaning staff." Sterling pushed the door open. The room was empty, smelling of lemon cleaner. But his eyes locked onto the chalkboard. He walked over, studying the yellow chalk. "Vance," Sterling asked, pointing at the board. "Did Henderson come back?" "No, sir. He left at 4. Sterling looked at the handwriting. It was precise. Academic. And the note about a scaffolding, that was specific pedagogical terminology. "Who cleaned this room?" Sterling demanded. "Elijah. The night janitor. He's been with us for 6 months. Sterling narrowed his eyes. "Find him. Tell him to come to the boardroom on Friday night. I want him at the emergency strategy meeting." "Sir?" Vance laughed nervously. "Elijah? He empties the bins. You want him to serve coffee?" "No," Sterling said, his voice cold. "I want him to sit at the table." The next day, the invitation spread through the faculty lounge like wildfire. The janitor was invited to the board meeting. The teachers snickered. They assumed Sterling wanted to make a point about cleaning up the mess the school was in, a cruel metaphor using a human prop. When Vance found Elijah in the boiler room, the older man was reading a tattered paperback. Vance didn't glance at the cover. "Elijah," Vance said, his tone dismissive. "Mr. Sterling wants you at the board meeting Friday. 7 p.m. Well, try to wear something nice." Elijah looked up, his eyes calm and deep behind his spectacles. "Am I in trouble, Principal Vance?" "No. Just, be there." Elijah nodded slowly. "I'll be there." When Vance left, Elijah closed his book. It wasn't a novel. It was the Journal of Educational Psychology, specifically an article on socioeconomic barriers to cognitive development in adolescence. Elijah sighed. He had tried to keep his head down. He needed this job. The medical bills for his late wife had decimated his savings, and at his age, in this economy, manual labor was the only thing that paid immediately. But his mind was starving. Friday night. The boardroom was a cavern of mahogany and leather. The air conditioning was set to a crisp 68 degrees. 12 people sat around the oval table, wealthy donors, the frantic Principal Vance, and 2 high-priced educational consultants from a firm called EDU Next. And Elijah. He wore a tweed jacket that was decades old but immaculately pressed, a white shirt, and a tie that had seen better days. He sat at the far end of the table, hands folded in his lap. The other board members ignored him, scrolling through their iPads. Sterling entered. The room fell silent. "Let's begin," Sterling said, sitting at the head. "Our math and science scores are stagnant. The parents are unhappy. EDU Next, what do you have?" One of the consultants, a young man in a sleek suit named Greg, stood up. He clicked a remote, and a PowerPoint presentation lit up the screen. "The solution is tablets," Greg said confidently. "We need to gamify the learning experience. Every student gets an iPad with AI-driven modules. It will cost $2 million, but the data shows." "The data shows nothing," a voice interrupted. The room froze. Heads turned. Elijah hadn't moved. He spoke softly, but his voice carried a resonance that commanded attention. "Excuse me?" Greg scoffed. "Mr. Elijah," Sterling said, leaning back in his chair. "Go on, Elijah." Elijah stood up slowly. "Gamification provides extrinsic motivation. It gives a dopamine hit for completing a task. But it destroys intrinsic motivation. You are trying to build scholars, not addicts. The problem with your calculus students isn't a lack of technology. It's a lack of conceptual anchoring." Principal Vance turned red. "Elijah, please sit down. You're here to observe, not." "Let him speak," Sterling barked. Elijah walked toward the whiteboard at the front of the room. He picked up a marker. "I've been listening to the teachers," Elijah said. "They teach to the test. They teach rote memorization. But Jean Piaget, the Swiss psychologist, argued that learners construct knowledge through experience. Your students are wealthy. They have never had to build anything. They don't understand physics because they've never fixed a car. They don't understand geometry because they've never framed a wall." Elijah drew a diagram on the board. It was a curriculum model, but unlike anything the consultants had shown. It was circular, integrating manual workshops with theoretical math. "You have a janitorial staff," Elijah said, gesturing to himself. "We fix the heating, we wire the lights, we calibrate the pool pumps. Why are the students in classrooms looking at screens? Bring them to the boiler room. Let them calculate the pressure variance in the HVAC system. That is Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. You bridge what they know with what they can do with guidance." The room was silent. The expert consultant looked furious. "This is ridiculous," Greg sputtered. "Who is this guy? He cleans the toilets. What does he know about Vygotsky or Piaget? He probably read a Wikipedia page on his lunch break." Greg turned to Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, are we really going to take curriculum advice from the help? This is an insult to my firm and to this board." Principal Vance nodded vigorously. "I agree. Elijah, you're fired. Get out." Elijah placed the marker down. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. He smoothed his tweed jacket and turned to leave. "Wait," Sterling said. He stood up and walked over to Elijah. "Before you fire him, Vance, I think you should ask him about the letter I found in his personnel file. The one he didn't include in his application, but was attached to his background check." Sterling pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "Elijah," Sterling said. "Why are you a janitor?" Elijah sighed. The shame he had tried to hide for so long bubbled up, but he swallowed it. "My wife, Sarah. She had pancreatic cancer. The treatment was experimental. Insurance wouldn't cover it. I liquidated everything. My retirement, my home. I needed a job with night hours so I could care for her during the day until she passed 3 months ago. I stayed because, well, I have nowhere else to go. And I like being near the school. I miss the environment." "What environment?" Greg asked, rolling his eyes. Sterling handed the paper to Greg. "Read it." Greg looked at the document. His face went pale. It's a transcript," Greg stammered. "From where?" Sterling asked. "Columbia University," Greg whispered. "And what is the degree?" Greg swallowed hard. "Doctor of Philosophy in Pedagogy and Curriculum Development. Minor in Applied Mathematics." The silence in the room was deafening. Principal Vance's mouth hung open. Sterling turned to the board. Dr. Elijah Washington was a tenured professor for 20 years before he retired to care for his wife. He has published 4 textbooks on the very subjects these consultants are failing to explain. I recognized his name the moment I saw the handwriting. I read his dissertation in college. Sterling turned to Elijah and extended his hand. Dr. Washington, I apologize for how you've been treated. You shouldn't be cleaning our floors. You should be running our academic board. Elijah looked at the hand, then at the faces of the people who had ignored him for months. He shook Sterling's hand. I don't want to run the board, Elijah said softly. I just want to teach. And maybe get a raise. The rent is high in this city. The changes were immediate. With Sterling's backing, the expensive consultants were fired. The budget for tablets was reallocated to a new program designed by Dr. Washington, Applied Academics. Dr. Washington didn't return to the janitor's closet. He was given the corner office and the title of Director of Curriculum Innovation. But true to his nature, he rarely sat in the office. He was found in the boiler room, not mopping, but standing before a group of AP Physics students, pointing at the pressure gauges. Calculus isn't lines on a page, Dr. Washington told the students, his eyes lighting up. It is the language of change. Look at this gauge. As the temperature rises, the pressure builds. The rate at which that pressure changes. That is your derivative. Now, who wants to calculate the explosion risk if we don't turn this valve? The students were mesmerized. For the first time, the math was real. It was dangerous. It was alive. 6 months later, Crestview Academy's standardized test scores didn't just improve, they shattered state records. The school became a case study for educational reform. One afternoon, Richard Sterling found Dr. Washington in the hallway. Elijah was picking up a piece of trash a student had dropped. You don't have to do that anymore, Elijah, Sterling said smiling. We pay people for that. Elijah smiled, tossing the wrapper in the bin. Mr. Sterling, a true educator teaches by example. If I'm too proud to pick up trash, I'm too proud to teach these kids. Sterling nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. You know, the board wants to rename the science wing after you. No need, Elijah said, adjusting his glasses. Just buy Mr. Henderson some better chalk. The dust is terrible for his allergies. The 2 men walked down the hallway, the millionaire and the janitor-turned-doctor, discussing the future of education, proving that intelligence has no uniform, and wisdom often hides in the humblest of places.